Hello everyone, I'm going to be covering the new German tank high tier heavy changes currently found on a 9.17.1 test server. Now, between now and actual release, some little details might change, so keep that in mind, but most of the changes should stick and really shouldn't really change at all. Looking at the things, I'm going to start out with the tech tree here. I haven't bought any of the new tanks currently on the test server. As you see here, you have a new tier 8, new tier 9, and a new tier 10 German heavy tank, and they switched the lines up a bit. Previously, I'm going to pull up an image here to show what I currently have unlocked. I had the mouse and the E100 unlocked, and the previous tanks bought before it. So essentially, what you're going to be getting if that happens, if you have the mouse unlocked, I'm not sure if you need it purchased. I think it's just unlocked, but better be safe than sorry. You will get both the VK101P and the Malshin unlocked in your garage, and you simply just have to buy them. You do have to, you know, basically unlock the track and the engines, but everything else on them, is ready to go. And then whatever experience you amass on the VK before the patch will stay with it to unlock the new tier 10. Now, getting into some more finer details now, let's just switch off here. I would like to start with the mouse because that's getting some changes, mainly to its gun and also to its armor. So let's start out with the armor here. Essentially what they are going to be doing to it, if I can actually, there we go, find the correct little screen I need here. They are buffing, currently this side little corner here isn't stronger than any armor around it. They are buffing that to 250 meter or millimeters, not meters. Holy shit, that would be freaking gigantic. So that's going to give a nice little boost to it. And on top of that, they're also buffing the turret armor. Excuse me there. 260 millimeters across the entire front outside of the mantlet. And that comes up from 240 millimeters. So that's going to be pretty significant because that's one of the primary weak spots on the mouse because you need to point your gun at an enemy to shoot it, and usually they wait and they smack you right back. So that'll provide pretty good protection. Tier 10 TDs are still going to cut through it, but against non-premium rounds, this might have an adverse effect and make more people fire more premium rounds, but we'll see. And then essentially the side armor view of the mouse gets a pretty significant buff too. So essentially from here down is spaced armor here. That's not getting changed. That's still going to be 105 millimeters thick. And then behind that, it used to be 80 millimeters. Essentially, the armor running behind the space armor. So that's pretty much weaker than the armor above it in some cases, but against heat shells it always poses problems. But the main view that you found is when you're angling a mouse, people could basically shoot right under the space armor and hit 80 millimeters of armor. They're now buffing that to 140 millimeters. It's a pretty significant buff. It's going to make damaging the mouse a lot harder, especially while it's angled. So the mouse is getting some pretty significant buffs in those areas as far as its armor goes. And on top of that, to take it even further, they're also buffing the gun here. Just bringing up, the other stats that I have over here. The one on the left that I guess pulled up here is currently on the 9.17 live server. And then, of course, the ones on the right are the proposed changes that you're going to see coming in the next patch. Now, as far as equipment and crew goes, both of these tanks are the same in those matters when it comes to the gun. And just looking at it, the reload on the left, on the current live server, I have a 12.3 second reload, and that's going to drop down to 9.91. So a pretty significant change. The rate of fire goes from 4.88 to 6.06. So it's a pretty good buff. The aiming time drops. Accuracy drops as well, a pinch, 0.33. And, aiming, as far as on the move dispersion, that also gets buffed. So its DPM goes from 2,390 to 2,968. It's pretty damn significant. It's the mouse with these armor changes and of gun buffs is going to be pretty awesome if they stick. Honestly, like the armor changes might cause more premium rounds getting thrown at it, which is definitely something that I think a lot of people disagree how the game should handle things. Buffing tanks armor to basically compensate for premium rounds. I'm not exactly a fan for that, but I think both of these changes combined are a little, like the mouse is slow is a little much. Like I think the gun might be changed a little bit before we actually see it released. In all honesty. All right. So next up, let's pull into the next tank I kind of wanted to focus on here. We have the infamous VK4502B. Now, this tank is also getting some changes to its armor. It's got to move around a couple screens here, but more or less, like I will bring up this little screen grab here. It doesn't show off too much since the gun does get some changes to it, but overall it's not too many differences. It gets a little bit more accurate, but as far as damage per minute and stuff goes, it doesn't change. It gets a little bit of gun handling buffs, but the armor on the VK4502B is going to be changing primarily. They're removing the weak spot of the machine gun ball. This little flat area is a semi-weak spot, and they're changing the frontal armor up a bit. Essentially, they are nerfing the lower plate and buffing the upper plate, I believe, by a pinch. Or no, I don't think they're buffing the upper plate, but the lower plate is dropping, from 200 millimeters thick down to 170 millimeters thick. So it's still going to be 259 millimeters of effective armor, but it's going to be significantly weaker than it currently is. And to kind of compensate for that, it's not just a straight out nerf. They are buffing the gun a bit. The side armor here, as you can see on this right little info grab here, compared to the left that my mouse is behind, the side armor is getting buffed to 120 millimeters across the entire side. If I can, 120 across the whole side. So while the lower plate gets a little bit weaker, it's still going to be damn strong for trying to fight. Tier 7 and 8 tanks shouldn't even try to shoot at it. Tier 9's not exactly the best idea either. You're better off a lot of times, testing your luck with the cupola. That's only 160 millimeters effective armor. And even the frontal turret, it is a pinch stronger, but if you're close up shooting the lower plate, it's going to be a lot stronger because you're shooting down at it. But even though they're nerfing the lower plate a little bit, it's actually kind of a buff in the armor to me in some way, because it still keeps enough armor to deflect majority of shots thrown at it. You lose a weak spot on the upper plate. Turret's still strong. Cupola remains a weak spot, but you're able to actually angle a little bit more with 20 more millimeters of armor on the side. So it's actually pretty, it's questionable again. They're nerfing, it seems like a nerf, but it's actually a buff in a way. Now, the E100, that is a little bit different too, which as you see me hovering these tanks here, it does show you a little bit more info as far as mastery badges and stuff if you look on the little tank image. Now the E100's also getting a slight change, 246 millimeters up from 235 penetration on its standard 15 centimeter round, and the 12 centimeter gets some pretty good buffs too as far as like accuracy, I think the reload, stuff like that. Now, just glancing over these tanks here, like I'll unlock them just to show them off here. It's just going to take a second. We have 3 new tanks still to go through. It's going to remain to be seen how the mouse prototypes work out, since they are very large, and who knows how they're going to work out. But I'm actually going to pop into this tank first here. Essentially the VK7201K clone in a way. Now this tank, both the VK and this tank got a little armor change prior to release. Armor wise on the front, pretty damn strong. There's no denying that. And rear mounted turret definitely is a somewhat of a hindrance, but it makes for a pretty decent side scraper. But this tank only gets a 12.8 centimeter gun here. As you see, don't have anything else to unlock on it. So it is going to be a little bit different than the VK7201K, with lower alpha. But, basically, I think it's a pretty good gun for this tank. Having a higher alpha, slower rate of fire sometimes isn't the best gun. But, this is a nice little compromise by Wargaming not to annoy people that currently have that tank, which I forgot to take off the VK thing. Sorry about that. Now moving to the tier 9 Malshin, I gotta get a couple modules up here. I would have unlocked all these before the video, but I wanted to show the tech tree how it was when you're first gonna pop on if you already have the mouse and the E100 unlocked. Now, as far as the Malshin here goes, being at tier 9, it looks pretty similar, to the standard mouse tank that we currently have in the game. Now, armor-wise, it definitely is a little bit worse off being a tier lower. The lower plate here, it's really it's 180 millimeters thick, 210 millimeters of effective armor, so weaker than the VK 4502B in the lower plate. And upper plate here is, it's a fair bit stronger. It has 349 millimeters of effective armor, no weak spot on the machine gun port, and the turret armor, the turret's decent, but much like the old mouse, essentially you're going to find that to kind of be the reason I think they buffed the tier 10 mouse's turret to 260 is this turret here has the 240 millimeters, and it's similar to the previous mouse as far as armor wise. It does have a little bit of a hole here to the left of its gun behind the mantlet, but 240 millimeters it's good for a tier 9, but people will be able to penetrate you through there. And then the commander's cupola is fairly strong, but it's definitely not going to stop a ton of rounds. Essentially it's the same effective armor in basically everywhere across the turret. So it's strong against lower tiers. Against 9s and 10s, they still can penetrate you, especially tier 10s. And then the side armor, that's when you start seeing it drop down compared to the standard mouse here. If you look at its side turret and hull armor, the Malshin, those values definitely don't stack up very well. It does have, the side armor and side skirts that you find on the mouse. So essentially the strongest part of the side armor is actually lowered down on this tank, but the sides only being 155 millimeters thick and flat, and the turret being thinner than the mouse's at tier 10 too, it is going to be pretty easy to damage on the sides and rear just because they are flat outside of this area here. But you can somewhat effectively angle your armor in this. Essentially the Malshin, even with the weaker armor, it's going to play much like the tier 10 mouse before. Same weak spots, the turrets, basically flat armor on the turret and shooting through the track area here. Now as far as the gun goes, there's not many complaints here. It's the typical 12.8 centimeter you find on German heavy tanks. There's low rate of fire. You have to pay kind of for having 2,300 hit points on the tier 9 with this amount of armor. But it's going to be much like the mouse. You can't expect too much out of these tanks if you don't like slow tanks. If they're not for you, that's why there's 2 other German heavy tank lines. Now let's get the VK100-01P kitted out here, just so I can kind of comment on this tank's, mainly the armor here, because everyone kind of knows how they're going to perform as far as mobility. And the gun on this even, 12.8 centimeter for the top gun again, low rate of fire, pretty good alpha damage, penetration's all right. It's pretty much what you expect going into it. Now the VK100-01P, being a tier 8, tier 6s have to face this, and tier 7, so armor wise this thing is massive. It only has 1700 HP, which is fairly good for a tier 8, but I almost think it could be a little bit higher, only because it is pretty damn slow. Top speed only of 20, and it's a very large target. But the lower plate here only winds up to be 125 millimeters thick. So that's going to be a pretty glaring weak spot. It only provides 177 millimeters of effective armor. Upper plate 340, and as far as this, it almost continues down here. This is spaced armor here, so you're not going to do any damage shooting through these areas. That's one plus of this tank. Essentially, the tracks come all the way up almost to here, but not that anyone's really going to penetrate you there for anyway. But the turret front on this, it's pretty good for tier 8. Most of the front, like other tanks in this line, very thick. It's actually pretty damn strong. The weakest areas are these flat areas that are around 220 millimeters of effective armor, and the cupola 210 millimeters of effective armor here. And this little bump that might look like a weak spot here, it's about the same, 240 millimeters of effective armor. And really the turret armor is pretty good. It will struggle against higher tiers, keep that in mind, but you can still get some bounces off of it. But if they nail you in the main weak spots, you're going to take some damage there. And then again, kind of like the tier 9 I guess went over, the sides are very flat and weak, and as far as protecting you against 7s and 8, basically tier 7, tier 8, tier 6, 6s and 7s will have some problems penetrating you. The sides, again, they're fairly weak, but you kind of see the space armor plate here on the bottom. That's the main strength of the side, people trying to hit that. But the rest of the side armor is fairly weak, especially this middle strip here. And then the rear of the tank, is kind of a little bit different. You do have 80 millimeters of armor on the back here. You can kind of see that it's not the actual hull. So that does provide some pretty good rear protection, especially from like heat rounds and stuff. People can shoot under it and hit this soft, essentially butt area. It's only about 120, 140 millimeters of effective armor. But behind this 80 millimeters of space armor is only 40 millimeters of armor. So again, very weak when you actually look at the tank. But that's the gist of, like, I don't want to make a gigantic video about just one, all the changes for German tanks, because there are a lot of them. But this is essentially the gist when it comes to the German heavy tank changes for the high tiers. It's a pretty big shakeup for this late in World of Tanks development cycle. But as far as buffs, it's very good for German tanks. The new Mouse prototype tanks leading up to the Mouse, it remains to be seen how well they perform. I feel like the tier 8 is going to struggle a little bit. I think they might buff its HP a little bit, or give it maybe a little pinch of armor here or there. But again, the main reason they can't make its armor too good is tier 6, tier 7 tanks specifically don't always have the best penetration. So that's why they have to keep some weak spots, and the tank would be indestructible against some tanks, even with premium rounds in a way. So they're probably going to touch the HP a little bit, maybe the mobility, the gun. But all the tanks, the changes look very good for German tanks. And the Mouse E100 specifically are getting some pretty good buffs to them, mainly the Mouse. And even the E75, I didn't touch on it, but that gets a little bit of gun handling changes, and that's pretty much a buff for that tank as well. And even though the VK4502B sees an armor nerf in a spot, it gets a buff to where I think it's actually going to make the tank a little bit better. Like against, say, like tier 10s or people chucking like 300 millimeter premium rounds, even with more than that penetration. The lower plate nerf will be evident there, but overall it's making the tank a little bit more balanced, because its frontal armor is just ridiculous, and it doesn't hurt the tank too much because you're still able to angle a little bit better in it. But anyway, thanks for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. hopefully I didn't make too many mistakes here. I tried my best. Hard to kind of juggle everything on my second screen here. But hopefully you enjoyed this. I will hopefully be streaming the test server someday coming up here soon. It looks like my dog is like, dude, you're talking too much. But anyway, thanks again for watching this video. I'll see you guys around sometime soon. Have a good day.